Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining the webinar this afternoon on the recently launched BHI funding opportunities. We don't see the participants from the room that we're in right now. So can we just get a thumbs up or a verbal acknowledgement that everybody's able to hear us? Okay, thanks very much, everybody. We're seeing some thumbs up here. Okay, we're going to dive in. I really want to respect everybody's time this afternoon. We have a full hour and a half set aside for the webinar this afternoon. We may not need that much time, but we wanted to ensure that we had enough time to answer any questions that the research community may have for us this afternoon. So just before we dive in, just a few housekeeping items and introductions. For those of you that I don't know, my name is Jennifer Gunning. I'm pleased to be the Senior Director of the Brain Heart Interconnectome here at the University of Ottawa. We wanted to let you know that we're going to be mostly presenting in English today, but we certainly have the capability to answer any questions in either language, so don't hesitate to pose your questions to us in French as well as English. We do have a French version of the slide deck available, which will be put in the chat and made available. Importantly, to let you know that the webinar will be recorded today. If colleagues weren't able to make the webinar this afternoon and are interested in the content, within a few days, they'll be able to access the webinar online. And just to let you know, we're going to go through the presentations up front. So please save your questions and things like that till the end. Please write them down so you don't forget them if you need to. And in order to pose a question in the webinar today, you should see a Q&A icon on your screen. You can use that Q&A icon to post your questions, and then we'll have the opportunity to read them out and address them once we get through the presentations. This is just a quick overview of what we're going to present today, how the time will unfold. I'm going to start with a very brief introduction to the BHI and then to the funding opportunities that we have recently launched. And then I'm joined by two of my colleagues here on the BHI Secretariat. Andrea Smith is our specialist in knowledge mobilization and patient engagement. She's going to talk to you about the patient engagement component of these funding opportunities and how you can address that in your proposals. And then Mary Catherine or Kate Waller is our senior advisor for ideas or inclusion, diversity, equity, accessibility, and social justice. And she's going to focus on some information related to the ideas elements of the funding opportunities and how you can effectively consider that as you develop your proposals. Then we'll open it up for the Q&A session before we wrap up. Okay. Just super really briefly, I'm sure everybody that's online is well aware that the BHI or Brain Heart Interconnectome is a grant that the University of Ottawa has received through the Canada First Research Excellence Fund. It represents the largest grant ever received by the University of Ottawa, so the university and the team is very proud of that. And what's really unique about these CFREF grants is quite different from a CIHR project grant, for example, is we are, as a program of research, really driving towards some very specific outcomes and deliverables that we have committed to in our CFREF application. This is certainly not a type of fund and forget funding model in this tri-agency program. There is very careful monitoring of how the CFREF projects are unfolding, very rigorous annual reporting, and we'll have to go through a midterm report as well as part of the CFREP program and really be demonstrating to our funders that we are very focused on the mission that we were funded to work towards, and that we're making very concrete progress towards our goals and deliverables. So it's just really important to keep that in mind as we think about our activities, including our funding opportunities that we're posing in the BHI. Oh, too many computers in front of me. The other thing I wanted to share, just by way of background information, that is quite foundational to the funding opportunities that we have launched, is a very quick overview of the scientific strategy that the BHI is based on. Our scientific strategy is organized around two core scientific foundations. You see those in the red bars at the top and the bottom of the slide here. Foundation 1 is focused on some core clinical and epidemiology research. And Foundation 2 is focused on advancing basic science or discovery research related to the interconnection of brain and heart health. Those scientific foundations are directly linked to the 4 thematic areas that you see in the corners of the white component of the slide. We have 4 thematic areas, each with very specific and clear objectives and deliverables that they are expected to meet within the 7-year timeframe of the CFREP funding. So theme 1 is focused around biomarkers and imaging tools and their development. Theme 2 is focused around therapeutics. Theme 3 focused on prevention across the life course, really focused on primary prevention of brain and heart disorders and their combined comorbidities. And theme 4 is focused on innovations in the health system and making sure that we have models of care and service delivery that doesn't deal with these things in silos, but rather integrates care across brain and heart conditions. The BHI also has some really novel elements by incorporating what you see in the middle of the slide in the blue, which are the cross-cutting themes or cross-cutting enablers. So not only is the BHI looking to innovate in terms of approaching science and really bringing brain and heart science and care together, the BHI has also committed to making changes in how science is conducted. And I would say the University of Ottawa and our partner institutions have committed to those changes in how science is conducted through the BHI as an exemplary model of this. And so what we mean by this and how we're incorporating it into our model is through the establishment of these cross-cutting enablers. These cross-cutting enablers are really providing a foundation and guiding principles for everything that we do in the BHI, including how we approach all of our activities within the Secretariat, and certainly within the type of science and how we want science to be conducted through the BHI funding programs. And so just to speak to a couple of these, for example, and some of them you'll hear more about today, patient engagement is an underlying principle of the BHI. From a governance perspective, we're incorporating patient perspectives into all of our governance committees. And as you'll see in the funding opportunities, we're really looking to engage patients in the science that's being conducted as well, in order to ensure that the outcomes and the impacts that we're deriving from the BHI really do align with the priorities of patients and people that are vulnerable to or at risk of combined brain and heart conditions. We've also made very strong commitments and are doing a lot of work with respect to inclusion, diversity, equity, accessibility, and social justice, which you'll hear more about from Kate today. Again, not only is that incorporated into the science that we're conducting, but in terms of how we're doing our hiring processes here within the Secretariat, the types of events that we're leading, and some of the partnerships that we're looking to develop as well. There's also a cross-cutter related to open science, again, to really try and maximize the impact of the research that you are all leading to ensure that the science and the data is as open as possible while also being protected to the degree that is necessary based on your area of science. So the funding opportunities that we have launched are really directly trying to drive towards the advancement of these scientific areas and also incorporate these cross-cutters as a commitment that the BHI has made. And I will say this was seen as quite an innovative and novel element of the BHI's proposal when it was reviewed by the CFREP Peer Review Committee, and I think is one of the reasons that the University of Ottawa was successful in receiving this large grant from the CFREP program. The last thing I just wanted to touch on quickly before we go into the funding opportunities themselves is the fact that we've recently launched a formal membership process for the BHI. We've launched this membership process so we have great clarity in terms of who are members of the BHI network. It allows us to monitor that, to count that, to report back on that, to ensure we clearly understand who is contributing to this expansive and interdisciplinary network, and to see it grow over time as well. It allows us to create what we're hoping will be a very strong community of diverse academics, partners, and trainees across the coming years of the BHI. And so we've recently launched this. And one of the things I wanted to flag in the webinar today is that academics need to be identified as a core academic member of the BHI network in order to be eligible for the BHI funding opportunities. Core academic membership is limited to the academics within the University of Ottawa, our affiliated research institutes, as well as our partner institutions on the CFREF project, the BHI project, the University of Saskatchewan and McGill. These individuals need to be eligible to hold tri-agency funding. That's a requirement of our CFREF grant. And these individuals need to have a substantive commitment to a program of research focused on integrated brain-heart health. We want to keep the application process for this fairly streamlined, but we are asking people to submit a letter of intent expressing your interest in both the interconnected brain-heart research as well as a commitment to incorporate the cross-cutting enablers into your science, as well as a brief CV and a letter of support. So if you're not already a core academic member of the BHI and you're looking to submit to these upcoming competitions, please take note of this and reach out and submit your application as soon as you can. So in terms of the funding opportunities that we have recently launched, you will have seen 2 launched so far on our website. These are part of the knowledge, research and knowledge mobilization programs that we committed to in our CFREF application. Stream 1 of those programs is what we're calling the Research Relationship Ignition Program, and Stream 2 is the Exploration Program. The Ignition Program is really designed to foster the development of relationships between researchers, patients, and other knowledge users. This is really to enable our research community to approach research in a way that is co-produced in collaboration with patients and knowledge users, another one of the cross-cutters and guiding principles of the BHI. Under Stream 1, we've set aside funding for 6 grants at $25,000 per grant over 1 year. Stream 2, the purpose of these projects is really to enable researchers in collaboration with patients and other knowledge users to advance pilot projects. So by testing a new hypothesis, to explore a bold and risky research question, or other strategies to advance really kind of novel and innovative brain-heart research. So we have funding available for 12 grants. The exploration grants are a little bit larger at up to $100,000 per grant over a 2-year timeframe. And I will just briefly walk through some of the critical elements that you need to keep in mind if you're looking to apply to these two funding opportunities. I'll go through the ignition program first and then the exploration program before turning it over to Andrea and Kate. In terms of the eligibility for the ignition program, there's three core requirements in terms of the type of project that you'll be putting forward. It's essential for all projects to use this research co-production approach. The projects are going to have to directly address the goals and deliverables of one or more of the BHI Foundation's themes or crosscutters that I've just reviewed. There are links to further information on all of those on our website. And obviously the projects need to be relevant to joint brain and heart health. In terms of the team, the eligibility requirements include the following. So the principal applicant needs to be an academic eligible to hold tri-agency funding. And as I just walked through, they need to be pre-identified as a core academic member of the BHI. In order to abide by the principles and the model that the BHI has been designed around, we're also requiring that there's a patient partner in the role of co-principal applicant. In addition to that, it's optional to have other principal applicants, other co-applicants, or collaborators on your projects as well. I've walked through this already. I don't need to dwell on this too much, but just a reminder, please be sure you apply to be a core academic member if you're not one already. If you're not sure, don't hesitate to reach out to the Secretariat right away. In terms of the application requirements, I won't walk through this in detail. This is all mapped out in the funding opportunity itself. Again, for the ignition program, the application overall is quite small. The largest component of your proposal will be the description of the project. The description of the project is limited to 1,500 or about 3 pages. And then that overall description of the project is supplemented with a number of other elements to the overall application that you see on the slide here. For the first time, we're trying REDCap as the platform for the submission of the applications. We'll welcome feedback on how that application process works for everyone, but we've tried to design the application for both of these programs so that it will be as easy as possible to complete all of the requested information. The other thing that I wanted to highlight here is, as outlined in the funding opportunity, we're really asking that everybody leading a new project to please reach out in advance of submission to the lead of the most relevant BHI Foundation theme or crosscutter. As I mentioned, the BHI is all about mission-driven research. There is a slate of baseline projects that we've already funded, and the intention is really to supplement the research that's already underway with projects that will fit really nicely into the overall objectives and deliverables of those various foundations and themes. So this is not intended to be overly directive in terms of the type of research that is funded, but just to make sure that the new projects aren't duplicating some work that's already underway, and that as early as possible, we're starting to incorporate new or potential projects into the broader work of the BHI themes and foundations and crosscutters. Just a quick snapshot of the review criteria for the ignition program. You see it mapped out here. So there's 3 broad areas that the applications will be assessed on. One is the makeup of the applicant or the team. The team will be assessed based on the suitability, its diversity, and the strength of the team to conduct the project and to incorporate both the appropriate scientific expertise as well as, lived or living experience with brain and heart conditions or communities that could be at risk of those conditions. We want to be supporting projects that have potential for really high quality collaboration between the applicant team And particularly for projects that will incorporate Indigenous populations, we would like to ensure that the applicant team has individuals with the necessary knowledge and experience to conduct events and engage with Indigenous populations in ways that are considerate of their cultures and are culturally safe, and really appreciate different ways of knowing, being, and doing. The second big category that projects will be evaluated around are the relevance and quality of the project. You can see the different elements there. These are spelled out in greater detail in the funding opportunity themselves, so please have a close look. And then the third key area is around the deliverables and expected impacts. And so we really want to see, particularly for these ignition grants, what is the deliverable that will be emerging from these activities that you'll be undertaking, and to understand how this will have benefits, not just for the researchers, but the other members of the research team, how you're incorporating partners into that, and do you have clear indicators that you will use to assess the effectiveness of the project overall. Quick recap of the timelines. So if you're not already a core academic member, please get your application in as soon as you can. We're looking to process those just as quickly as we can here within the Secretariat. The application deadline is December 18th, and then the funding start date is March 2025. For the exploration program, you see the objectives outlined in the slide here. As I mentioned, we're really wanting to create opportunities to test some high-risk, novel, and innovative projects in brain-heart health. These projects may turn into longer-term projects funded through the BHI, or hopefully we'll be creating a platform for our research community to be successful in going out in securing funding through other funding opportunities and programs as well, whether that be through the tri-agencies or other funding sources. There are a few elements that are required within these projects, which I'll speak to a bit more on the next slide. But in the funding opportunity, you'll also see a number of things that we're encouraging, but not requiring in these projects. So I really wanted to highlight the things that are encouraged, but I wanted to assure you that if you don't check all of these boxes, your application is still valid and will be accepted. We're just really trying to create an environment that is as interdisciplinary as possible, that we're really trying to create opportunities for early career researchers and to really expand the breadth and diversity of people involved in BHI research. And so we're doing that by having all of these different elements that you see on the right-hand side here as things that are encouraged within the research projects that we're funding. A quick note that we are encouraging you to bring in additional funding through other institutions. So these projects may be larger than $100,000, but again, it's not mandatory, but it is encouraged if you have other funding sources that you can match up with the BHI funding sources for these projects. In terms of the eligibility, it's very similar to the Ignition Grant Program with a couple of differences. So for the exploration program, in terms of the project itself, we really want to be funding things that are interdisciplinary in nature. And so that's an additional requirement for this program. And really, in order to foster and make sure that we're pushing that interdisciplinary element, we are requiring that there be an additional co-principal applicant on these projects so that there are 2 academics involved in these pilot projects and that are individuals from clearly distinct areas of science. Similarly, you are able to have other principal or co-applicants or collaborators on these projects. Similar application requirements for the exploration program, but because these are larger grants, we're obviously allowing the applications to be slightly larger. These are about 5 pages in length altogether. Really, one of the main differences in this one, because of the nature of the project that we're looking to fund here, we are looking for a background section to be included so you can really properly justify the rationale and reason for this research to move forward. Risk mitigation is another element that's incorporated into the project description that is not included in the Ignition Grant program. There's also, when it comes down to study design and analysis approaches, there are a few questions that you'll be asked, whether you have considered things like sex and gender-based analysis and other elements like that within your study. And then you'll have an opportunity to describe how that will be done or why not within your project. Again, just a reminder to please make sure you're discussing these proposals as early as you can with the lead of the most relevant foundation, theme, or cross-cutter. One thing that I'll say here, with respect to the Ignition Grant, the description of the project, you'll be able to upload it as an attachment in the application portal or to just write your description within the web form itself. For the exploration program, we haven't enabled the uploading of the description of the project because there's a number of sub-questions that you'll have to answer. So for the exploration program, you'll just complete the description of the project right in the web form. So that's another distinction between the application process for the two programs. The exploration program, again, please have a close look at the review criteria. There are the same three categories for the review that the peer review committee will be assessing, but there are definitely nuances in terms of how the peer review committee will be assessing the applications to these two programs. Just as an example, in terms of the applicants, we will be having a closer look at the diversity of the applicant team in terms of the diversity of the scientific expertise that is going towards these novel and innovative projects. With respect to the timelines, they're the same as the Ignition Grant funding opportunities. So these applications are also due on December 18th. I'm now going to turn it over to Andrea, who's going to talk a little bit more about the patient component of the funding opportunities.
Thanks, Jennifer. So yeah, as previously introduced, my name is Andrea, and I'm the specialist for our patient engagement and knowledge mobilization crosscutter here at the BHI. So as Jennifer previously mentioned, and something that is unique with the BHI is we're asking that all of these funding applications involve a patient partner as a co-principal applicant on the application. So when we're talking about patients, we define these as individuals that have lived or living experience. And this can include caregivers, family, friends of the brain or heart condition that your research is focusing on. If you're someone that falls more into theme 3 and is looking at prevention across the lifespan, this can also apply to individuals who might be at high risk of developing brain heart conditions later in life, or those that might have had a family member who experienced these conditions. So they might not be what we would traditionally define a patient as, but they still offer unique expertise into the project. And so the reason that we're really asking for patient partners to be co-leads on these projects is because they bring a really valuable expertise and experience to the research. They can help strengthen your application in a number of ways, but as the co-lead on these projects, we're really asking them to complement your expertise. As researchers, oftentimes, we tend to be very close to what we're studying, and the patients can bring a perspective that you might not have already considered. They can speak more on what research questions, priorities are relevant to people who are suffering from these conditions on a day-to-day. And they can also assist you in developing these applications. They can review your patient engagement plan, your plain language summaries, and also assist in other areas of the research. So as part of the funding applications, we are asking that you detail your patient engagement plan. And so a few things to think about when you're writing these plans is exactly how you're going to engage with patients. In addition, there might be other patients that you engage with throughout the research project, not only the co-lead for these projects. So some things to think about is how you're fostering collaboration within the research environment. If you're a basic scientist, this might be your first time working with patients. So we really ask that you think about how you're going to welcome them into the roles of the team, and be really mindful of how you're going to address the potential power imbalances that can come when you're bringing patients into these research spaces. Something else that's also really important to consider is how you're going to support and offer compensation to your patient partners. We do have compensation guidelines that are listed under the resources for all of these funding opportunities that should be built into your budgets of the programs. But it's also important to consider that patients may want different types of compensation. Some patients do this purely out of interest, and they really enjoy being involved in the writing process of publications, being invited to conferences to see what other research is going on in this space. So it's really important that you think about some other ways that you might offer additional compensation and capacity building for the patients that you're working with. So we're asking for you to engage with patients in a meaningful way because we really see that there's lots of benefits in the research process. As I previously touched on, they can help identify relevant research priorities that are important to the people that have these brain-heart conditions. They can also be really helpful in speeding up the dissemination of the research results from the lab environment into the public. They're also really good at increasing your capacity and the capacity of your trainees on engaging with the public, how to speak to them in a way that is relevant to them. And especially for the basic scientists, they can be really helpful in allowing you to understand what the public cares about when it comes to your research. There's tons of ways that you can foster meaningful engagement throughout the research. If you're a basic scientist, I would highly encourage thinking about giving patient partners a lab tour if it's possible. Lots of times your research tends to be a little bit abstract for people who haven't seen what it actually looks like on the day-to-day. So if it's possible to give them a tour and show them what it really looks like, that can be a really great way to foster connections with your patients and bring them up to speed on what your research is focusing on. These patients, they're more than just patients, they're people too, and they bring a very diverse expertise and skill set. We have lots of patient partners who have had amazing careers in policy and academia and education. And so they can be really helpful in suggesting ways that you can promote your research results and use different knowledge mobilization materials beyond just your conference publications. And we want to acknowledge that patient engagement is really going to look different for researchers throughout the BHI, depending on what you're studying, what theme or foundation you fit into. Your level and type of engagement with patients is going to be different. So we really ask that you think about what is unique to your project and how you can really meaningfully engage with patients throughout your research. And finally, we have a lot of resources and support available to individuals who are interested in applying to these funding opportunities. So myself and Dawn Richards, the patient engagement lead, we are very happy to connect with you if you need help identifying patients who would be interested in working with you, and also facilitating some of the types of patient engagement activities you might talk about in your funding application. We do have a drop-in session that's available for you to attend and just ask us questions, run ideas by us. This is happening next Thursday at 9 a.m. If you're affiliated with the Heart Institute, Heather Lannon, she is the patient engagement lead there. And she also brings a really diverse skill set because she has experience being a patient partner herself. So she can be a great resource if you're wanting to bounce ideas around for what your patient engagement efforts look like. We've put some of these resources listed in the chat here too. But I would highly encourage for once you finish your applications to do a self-assessment of your patient engagement activities using the Portlet. And if you're a basic or preclinical scientist and approaching patient engagement for the first time, I would highly recommend you visit labpartners.ca because they've got a wealth of information on their website. We've also put an additional resource in the chat that is a toolkit for patient and public engagement for those who haven't done it before. So feel free to check that out. And with that, I'm going to pass it now over to Kate to talk about incorporating ideas into the applications.
And maybe just a reminder, if folks have questions, you can feel free to start putting them in the Q&A at any time.
OK. Je vais juste parler en français un peu, juste pour le bilinguisme. Alors, je m'appelle Marie-Catherine Waller, je suis la conseillère principale de Ideas pour le secrétariat du BHI et je vais parler un peu des éléments essentiels et encouragés pour vos applications, pour pour les occasions de financement, ignition et exploration. Alors, je vais arrêter là en français. So just to remind us all, BHI was designed to be transdisciplinary, and as Jennifer was saying, and we all know, there are these 7 enablers to enhance, to make that transdisciplinary, and ideas is one of them. And so one of the reasons, so we have an action plan and we have our objectives. And right from the get-go of the proposal for the BHI, inclusion, diversity, equity, accessibility, and social justice were core elements of the BHI design. And the main reason is because there's so many groups and people among us that have been excluded from traditionally from brain heart research. And so we've defined 4 groups, but that can be broadened by intersectional factors. But we know, just to remind us all, these are women, Indigenous peoples, persons with disabilities, racialized individuals and communities, and Two-Spirit and LGBTQI groups. But obviously you can intersect with many of those groups. And then when you look at age and other factors, it really becomes, when we're looking at brain and heart vulnerabilities and participation in research, these are key. So inclusion, diversity, equity, accessibility, and social justice are key concepts that anyone involved in the BHI should be familiar with, but they're also the objectives of what we're trying to do at the BHI as a program. And so inclusion is really about removing the barriers and trying to bring inclusive practices so that everyone feels that they belong and they can thrive. How can they thrive? Partly through diversity and equity. Diversity is not just about increasing representation in teams or among the patients with lived experiences or the knowledge users you might engage with, but it's also about active participation. That's a very important element. And a lot of people have experienced historical discrimination and harm. So we're trying to be conscious of our biases because we all have biases. So we need to create that culture. And then equity is about positive discrimination and maybe having targeted interventions so that you can actually reach out to people that might not be part of the healthcare system as part of your patient engagement. Accessibility is a really important theme for the BHI, and it's that 30% of Canadians live with disabilities. And already at BHI, 16% of our members are self-identifying as living with a disability. But just to say that, so that's really important. Accessibility is a big thing, not just accommodation, but eventually a more systemic approach. Social justice is about social accountability. How are we being accountable? How are we doing responsible research? Well, from an ideas perspective, to do that, we can take on more inclusive research practices. We can understand approaches like anti-racism, anti-ableism, gender just. You know, we really, our dream is no barriers. That's very difficult. It's a change process and we need to acknowledge that. But the idea is that we really want to embrace empowerment, but we can't empower other people. We can only create the enabling factors and conditions for them to then be empowered. So those are the key foundational concepts and objectives of the BHI, which underline these two funding programs. Next slide. Oh, it's me that's doing it. One moment. So now I'm going to go into the, I've already mentioned this, that again, just to emphasize, and I know most of you know this, but so much traditional research in brain heart has excluded certain groups. And so the more we can disaggregate by sex and age and gender, at least, the more and the more intersectional we can be looking at the social determinants of health, the better, the more precision we're going to have, the better tailored care models that we're going to have. And just to give some examples, and I'm sorry I don't have the references for these. For instance, we know that women, a lot of people already know that, but for heart failure, there is more, you know, there's this whole story about women that were undervalued because it was the male model. And we know that for Minoka, women are more vulnerable to that, but also that the post-heart attack outcomes can be more women, it can be more severe for women. There's racialized individuals which have heightened risk because of historical racism, systemic biases, health inequities. Comorbidities is a really big thing in, I think, intersectional perspectives that we need to look at, and other social factors like housing, food insecurity, increased risk. We also did a big study in our a systemic scoping study for ideas to find out in the research ecosystem what are some of the major barriers. One of the things is that a lot of researchers might not have, we're asking them to do ideas, but they might not have the capacity or the resources. So we need to, as the BHI, we really want to create that. And we hope that you can work with us in your proposals, considering some of those elements. And maybe we can support you in that process. So I won't go into a lot of detail here because we're going to share this PowerPoint after, but just to say that there is discrimination and exclusion at all levels. And for accessibility, yes, we need to focus on, there's accommodation, but we need to go further than that and really transform the research ecosystem and the health system. So now we get into the actual guidance around for the ignition and exploratory research grants. What are we looking for? So the ideas is BHI actually has a statement of commitment for ideas, and that commitment is really about becoming socially conscious, inclusive, impactful, community-centered and based through an ideas approach. What does that mean for these research grants? Well, it means for a proposal, you need to be thinking about these concepts in your research team and environment. That means the diversity in the team. And as Jennifer said, we're encouraging this. I also think it's worth mentioning if you've already done something, you can mention that in your proposal. If you've already done something in the baseline, the foundation, the first year, please share that. Also, we're trying to have inclusive, equitable, safe workplaces. I'm going to talk about what that might mean in practice very shortly. Now in the ideas in terms of, we're trying to see it in all phases of the research. So that's from problem, design, implementation to the outcomes. In the proposal applications, those sections are there, right? So the next slide, I will be explaining about the, at the least, there should be sex and GBA considerations, or to explain why you are not going to have sex and GBA in your proposal, especially for the exploratory grant, like Jennifer mentioned. We also want to create, as Andrea was saying, the partnerships and patient engagement. There's so many excluded, systemically and historically excluded groups. So we need to adopt fair and just modalities of engagement. So we'll give you a few ideas on that, although we know a lot of you have already practiced these. For those of you who applied for the baseline proposals, there's some incredible things you were doing. So we really encourage building on those. And obviously we want the outcomes. The outcome of the BHI is brain heart health equity for all. So that is for every single person, right? We really want to do that. So here are some, you're going to get a copy of this slide, but I'll just, of these slides, but I'll just go over this briefly. So what we're looking at in terms of diversity in the research team and safe and inclusive work environment this is a way to kind of break it down. The idea is if you could describe one challenge in your team, for instance, around underrepresentation of certain groups or lack of, maybe you feel like there's a need for room for improvement in understanding ideas, integration in your team. Or maybe in your patient engagement, which is, for the exploratory grant and for the ignition grant, there's supposed to be a co-applicant. So are there some considerations you could make there? So really define one challenge or gap or many or multiple, and think of one idea's best practice that you could take to address it, implement it, but also track it. Some examples are debiasing team and patient recruitment and retention. How do you retain people? Ensuring people have that awareness of inclusion and equity and diversity and social justice principles, accessibility. Cultural safety is from Indigenous engagement, but it's actually in the BHI Ideas Action Plan that we want to learn. The ideas want to learn from the Indigenous engagement lead on this because it applies to any group that's also excluded. And there's some other ideas here around even if in your mentorship with trainees and also having targets. For instance, equity targets. There are the Canadian Research Chair has specific targets. For instance, 7.5% of teams should represent people with disabilities, or 4.9% for Indigenous communities, 50% women. So these are some markers we can use. And the other suggestion is think of it as a strategy. Think about you identify the problem, you find a solution, and you have a tracking, way of tracking that. That's kind of the way to do that. For that. So the next area we're going to look at is the sex and gender-based analysis. And we know that in basic and preclinical, obviously, you're not necessarily going to be doing in your actual research gender studies, but you will be looking at sex-based factors. And but in your engagement with patients, or in your outreach and your users, you might taking a gender lens and a plus lens, so looking at the intersectionality and the social determinants, you could look at it that way. And then it goes on, obviously, to clinical areas, and we have our tailored care models. We want to make sure that everyone at every stage, at every age and every stage of their life has, that we're making sure that our brain heart research is really maximizing on the benefits, the participation and benefit of all. So the sex and gender is really about that. And there's some, I know a lot of you already know about that because it's a requirement of the Tri-Council agencies. And so now we're going to just go into a sort of overview in the description. It says to describe the cross-cutters, and they can be intersecting, right? In the patient engagement, you can integrate ideas, concepts, but you want to have in your problem analysis, if you could define and integrate an equity deserving group barrier or vulnerability. It could be by sex, age, gender, disability, looking at the social determinants that are relevant to your research context, because we don't, that's really important, is where you work, what is most relevant. Once you've identified that, as Jennifer mentioned, and we're using CIHR guidelines and the Tri-Council to really say, is a gender and sex-based analysis relevant or not to your research? Why or why not? We do want to hear that. And we're also interested in how you might be taking on some inclusive methods in your research team and research itself. And a perfect example is targeted outreach to equity deserving groups. We know for clinical trials, there's that, but also in the patient engagement, there is, and we can help you with these things if you're funded, or as Jennifer and Andrea have said, you can reach out to us about some of these things. And then finally, you need to be able to track what you're doing. It's not just a question of saying you're going to do something based on what a document says on the website, but also tracking it, being accountable. And it could be at the least just disaggregating data by quantitative and qualitative methods. And looking at your targets. You might want to look at one interesting thing is the knowledge users, who's using the knowledge, maybe disaggregating that if it's about health decision making, for instance, things like that. And these are just a few guidance questions, which are from the Tri-Council guidance documents for grant applications. And this is like the baseline. So maybe just like Andrea was saying, there's some, and Jennifer, we had the criteria. You might be able to use these guidelines as you review your proposal. Are identity considerations accounted for in all phases of the research? Who benefits from what you're doing? Have you considered any intended or unintended impacts of the planned research, positive or negative? And how might you be able to mitigate that? Are there certain people that are excluded? For instance, people that are not accessing the healthcare system that you want to reach out to. 3, have you considered local or regional contextual factors related to ideas? You're all working in very different contexts, right? So you need to look at that context where you're in. It's very ideas is a very contextualized principle. And then finally, does the research engage or involve Indigenous or equity deserving groups? Have you considered normative guidance? So we all know the Tri-Council has the ethical conduct for research involving humans, chapter 4 and 9. Chapter 4 is really for equity deserving groups, and 9 is for Indigenous engagement. And just bringing that, because it is, although I'm not representing the Indigenous engagement leads, it's an opportunity to just share that with you. And without further ado, the final thing is, if you have any questions, you can reach out to me. There's also the cross-cutter lead, Emilio Alcaron, which which I think most of you, if you have any questions, we could actually put it in the chats. And also, these are just, although the resources are listed in the funding request application, these are just 3 that are very useful. Thank you.
But one more slide. Thank you, Andrea and Kate, for all of that great information. One thing I wanted to mention is just for people to be aware, what we've been talking about today are the 2024 programs that we have launched. Please know that the intention will be to launch very similar programs in 2025. So we anticipate within 9 months or so, there will be additional opportunities for the Ignition Grant Program and the Exploration Program. So if projects aren't quite ready for the December timeframe, we recognize that the timelines for this first program are fairly short, but please rest assured that these opportunities will come up again. There have been a number of questions that have been posed in the Q&A. I've been doing my best to keep up and I've been typing answers in as we go. Maybe I'll just quickly speak to those, and I see we've got one more question that has come in as well. So maybe I'll go to the new question that hasn't yet been answered electronically, and then we can review some of the Q&As that have been responded to in the Q&A session. We're asking for clarification around the requirement to discuss the proposed project with the lead of the relevant themes. How is this discussion documented as it's completed? So we're really leaving that up to the applicants and the leads. We are not asking for formal documentation of that. There is a checkbox in the applications for you to indicate that those conversations have happened. We'll allow that to happen verbally. You can have a conversation via email. We'll really leave it to your discretion, and we'll trust that our applicants are being honest when they're checking that box. As I said, the intention is really just to help us ensure that over the lifespan of the BHI, that we are developing kind of a harmonious research initiative where all of the projects are complementary to one another in one way or another. And we're really counting on those leads to help us integrate new projects under the relevant theme and foundations. And so the earlier those conversations can happen, I think the more effective that we're going to be in really maximizing the impact of these individual projects by creating opportunities for them to be connected with the other relevant projects within the BHI ecosystem. Feel free to keep the questions coming in. I'll just, yeah.
It's under the chat.
Can you show the chat there? I've got the Q&A open here. I don't think there's Q&As coming in the chat. If you go over to the right, you can see if you can pull up the Q&As. Okay. Do you speak to this one? Yeah, okay. So in terms of, so I'm looking at the question with respect to, this is regarding the exploration program, I believe, and the requirement to have investigators from two distinct scientific disciplines. So the BHI has not set a definition for disciplines. What I can tell you is that our funder, the Tri-Agency Institutional Program Secretariat, or TIPS, their measure of interdisciplinarity of the CFREF projects overall is based on the Canada Research Classification System, or the CRDC coding. And so we are required to report on at the group level. So that Canadian classification system, you can pick, there's different tiers to that classification system, and we are required to report at the group level. So if you have individuals, and we are asking for people to indicate their CRDC codes in their BHI applications, because we need that data to report back to our funder. So we have not formally adopted that as a disciplinary definition for the BHI, but I would say that's one way you could assess whether you have researchers from distinct disciplines, is by looking at the CRDC codes of those investigators. Please keep in mind as well that it's really up to the applicants to convince the peer reviewers that this project is bringing together investigators from different scientific disciplines or perspective, so that the same issue or the same research question can be looked at from different perspectives. That's the whole intention between these different disciplines. That is part of the review criteria. It's part of the application form where you have to describe the different perspectives that are brought to bear within the applicant team. So some guidance and flexibility there that's hopefully helpful. Will an English copy of the webinar PDF be made available? Oh. So we can try and make that available. I know the recording will be available on the website if we're able to. I don't know the technical side of things, but we will try and make a PDF available as well, both in English and French. Yes, you'll see in the application form that for academic applicants, there's a small space for the principal applicants and the co-applicants that are academics to provide their CRDC code. Again, that is because on an annual basis, we have to provide that information back to our funder. So we're asking to have that collected right up front when you're applying for funding. So I'm looking at the question about, is it required to have co-applicants from different disciplines? So for the ignition, the relationship ignition program, that isn't a requirement. The application can be from two principal applicants, one that is an academic and one that is a patient partner. For the exploration program, the requirement is that there be three principal applicants. Two of those principal applicants are to be academics from distinct research disciplines. The third principal applicant for the exploration program is to be the patient partner.
So we've put a PDF version of all of the information in the webinar available for you to download in the chat as well.
Can you answer Catherine's question about being interested in being a patient partner?
Oh, yeah. So yeah, Catherine, I see your comment that you're interested in being a patient partner. So if it's okay with you, I'll reach out to you directly following this webinar so that we can get in contact and see if there's a good opportunity for you to get involved with researchers at the BHI.
I'm looking at the question from 1258 about speaking with leads of the crosscutters. So the funding opportunities have been designed to be quite flexible in terms of the nature of the projects that can be put forward, particularly for the Ignition Grant program. The cross-cutting themes are, as you have heard today, directly incorporated into the projects and what we're asking people to do. The cross-cutter leads will be able to provide a lot of advice in terms of whether projects are going to be relevant and to that whether they will contribute to advancing the goals and the action plans that each one of those cross-cutters have put together. So in the Ignition program, for example, there could be projects specifically related to some of the activities of the cross-cutters. And so in that context in particular, talking to the cross-cutter leads would be highly relevant. Of course, those projects are also going to have to be relevant to brain heart health. But I think in some cases, the cross-cutter leads will be highly relevant to discuss your project with. Yeah, okay. We're seeing some open questions there, but those are the ones that have been responded to verbally. Sharing. Yeah.
So now anyone can pose a question that they'd like.
Exactly. Yeah. We'll stick around for a little bit longer in case people are contemplating additional questions. If not, that's okay. We'll sign off. Thank you for the comment about the requirement for a CV for the patient partners. As I said initially, we are recommending the narrative CV. We do see it as an improvement to the previous common CV that was used by the tri-agencies. We have been having some conversations about whether a different type of CD format would be beneficial to have for BHI competitions. Those are ongoing conversations. So for now, we're recommending the narrative CV. But as I said, this is not mandatory. If patient partners have a CV in another format, particularly a format that they've used in the context of other research projects, we will absolutely accept a CV from a patient partner in another format. So that doesn't need to be a barrier to their participation at all. I just know from a peer reviewer perspective, the more consistency there is in terms of the information that they're receiving, the easier it is for them to absorb and to assess applications. So some consistency there is beneficial, but it is not required. Please don't let that be a barrier for your patient partners. So Sheldon, just looking at your question here. So how many degrees of separation between the patient partners and the academics? I mean, we don't have any specific guidelines or rules around that. I think you would want to be incorporating people that would be kind of unbiased in their approach, that have expertise and independence to provide the type of guidance that we're looking for patients to bring into these research projects. I don't know if my colleagues have any other advice to share with respect to that.
I agree. In response to the comment that some patient partners may prefer to stay anonymous, I would recommend reaching out to myself and Dawn, and potentially we can have a conversation about how we could approach that when it comes to your funding application. It's not a situation that we've encountered thus far, so I think that one would need a little bit more of an in-depth conversation onto how to solve that issue.
We'll leave the line open for several more minutes if people are still thinking about and typing their questions. Please feel free to follow up afterwards as well. This is not a one-time opportunity to have your questions answered. We've provided our personal email addresses in the funding opportunities themselves. You'll also see the general mailbox for the BHI. We check that mailbox multiple times a day, and we'll get back to you just as fast as we can if you have additional questions leading up to the application deadline. So the budget form it's an Excel template that you have available. You can download it from the application form. And so the budget just allows you to indicate how you'll use the project funding to service your needs. The RE form is a form that is a University of Ottawa form. I'm forgetting the full name of the RE form. I don't think I have it here, but it just ensures that you have followed the requirements of the institution in terms of ethics approval. I'm forgetting what other aspects are considered part of that RE form, but they're quite distinct. And the RE form is required for any research that is being administered by the University of Ottawa. There's a link to that form in the application as well, or on the website. I see there's still about 20 people on the line, so we'll keep sticking around for a bit in case anybody has an additional question. We are pleased to have the opportunity to do this session today. This is the first time that we've tried this for the BHI, but we had a really good turnout today. We've had some really good questions that will hopefully make it easier for everybody to move forward with their applications. So we can do this again if everybody found it was useful. We'll leave it open for 2 more minutes. Maybe we'll say 1:16. If anybody needs a little bit extra time to pose their question, just put something short in so that we know that it's coming, and we'll stick around a little bit longer. Otherwise, we'll sign off at 1:16. Maybe one thing I'll share is in the applications, we're asking everybody to provide suggestions in terms of potential reviewers. Please think broadly as you're providing reviewer suggestions. The BHI is currently working to establish a large pool of reviewers that will have very diverse areas of scientific expertise that includes knowledge users, it includes patient perspectives. And so the suggestions that you provide in your application applications will be invaluable in helping us to establish this pool of peer reviewers that will service us not just for these current programs, but will hopefully service the BHI for the years to come. So welcome any suggestions that you have. I believe there's a place for 3 reviewer suggestions to be included. If you have more, feel free to email us with more. All right, we're down to 10 participants. Thank you very much, everybody, for attending today. And a big thank you to the team here in the room and to Ashleen and Ellie behind the scenes that have made the webinar possible today. Really appreciate everybody's contributions. Have a good afternoon, everybody.